Hey everyone, it's time to do something a little bit different today. What do we have here? We have a very difficult to read box. I'm not sure if anyone can tell what this is. We have a little hint sticking out the end. What could you be? So, first things first, big shout out to my Uncle Gary for making this video possible. He was actually the person who found this for me and gave it to me. Here, we can see a little bit of writing. Cut something? Cutlery? Is this a piece of cutlery? No, it's not. It is, however, something pretty old, pretty interesting. This is a straight razor. Okay, so that's fine, I guess. The scales are kind of weird, kind of interesting, this sort of finger bone pattern. But I want to look at the blade. So you can see the writing here. Diamondine number 7. This is one of our hints. What is this thing? It's certainly old. It's seen some action. It's a little beat up. There is definitely some pitting and some rust on the steel. And then on the other side, we have some additional writing. M.E. Reppenhagen, Germany. So, what is this thing? Where does it come from? Well, the sooner part of that answer, where did it come from, is it came from a bathroom remodel of all places, tearing out an old bathroom in an old house, and this was just discovered lurking behind a wall or a cabinet or something strange like that, and just in its box. So this is where all the rust comes from, is, all of that moisture from being in a bathroom for untold years. But apparently this belonged to my uncle's father, who had served in World War II. So he was thinking, was this some sort of, World War II piece? Because apparently the knife comes from Germany. The great uncle served in Germany. Could there be a connection there? Could it have been U.S. Army issue? So what's the deal with this thing? So I did a little history, and as is typical, came up with more questions than answers. But some digging on this Reppenhagen name led me not actually to Germany per se, but to New York. So we'll come back to that in a minute. And then these razors, these Diamondine razors, are actually fairly popular among razor enthusiasts. So we've got two different things to look at today. One is trying to get some answers to some questions of where did this thing come from before it ended up in my great uncle's bathroom, forgotten for decades. And is it a good razor? What can we do to rehabilitate this thing and make it new? Because, it's an antique in a sense, but it's hardly a museum piece. This was something that was meant to be used. So let's rehabilitate this and see how it does. Time to rehabilitate this guy. So if you look on the edge here, again, you can see some of that rust, but you can also see on the edge, there is still a pretty nice bevel on this thing. So I'm hoping that I can just spend some time polishing the edge and getting the rust off and resharpening it without actually having to go to the whetstones and put a new bevel on this thing. For two reasons. First, it's rather a pain, and second, I don't want to mess this thing up. So that's what my plan is for this thing, is to just get out the strop with some polish and see if I can get through that rust and get this thing back into sharpness. So I have here a paddle strop that is set up with some 1 micron polish on one side and then 0.5 micron polish on the other side. Now I'm hoping between the two of these that I can get through that rust and get the edge good and sharp and not have to reset anything. So I'm not going to do anything too fancy here. Just going to go back and forth a few times, feeling how that bevel feels. Does it line up nicely on the strop? Can I feel the polishing medium doing its work? And we're just going to go with this for a little while. It is definitely going to take some time to get through that rust on this level. If I used something more aggressive, if I got out the whetstones, then I'm sure I could do this a lot faster. But then there would also be a greater chance of me messing up the bevel on this thing. So already on the side that's less rusty, there's a lot more edge shine visible now. It's a little more mirror-like, a little more reflective, so that's encouraging. The curve that it follows is also pretty nice. So I think that's going to be fine. I'm more concerned about that rust spot right there. That's just going to take... there's going to have to be some material removed to get through that. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on 1 micron here, and we'll see if it gets better. About 10 minutes later, we're doing pretty okay on this thing. There's still quite a bit of rust up top, but I haven't really been working on that. I mostly wanted to get this blade area cleaned up, and it is much improved. There's still a little bit of rust right there, but overall, I was able to get through almost all of it just with the polishing compound. So that's cool. We're going to go over to 0.5 micron and finish sharpening this thing up. A couple things that I noticed as I was working with this. So first, it is a hollow grind, and that starts to give some information about the age of this thing, because in the 1800s, or at least the earlier part of the 1800s, wedge-shaped razors were more common, and the hollow grind didn't really become more popular until later, closer to the 1900s. So this can't be super old because it's not wedge-shaped, it is a hollow grind profile. It is also really nicely set with the angle here. It's been very easy to work on sharpening the edge. So that, plus a couple other hints that I'll get into, does make me think this was a mass-produced, or at least a factory-made piece rather than something that was handmade. It's just a little bit too perfect, and it does seem to come from the late 18 to early 1900s, which is when a lot of mass production of razors started to happen. Safety razors hadn't really taken off yet. So yeah, going to get the 0.5 micron going and just touch up the edge a little bit. Try to get that nice and sharp. And just going to go slow and easy, make a few passes. I don't think it's going to take that much. There's already a pretty good mirror finish on the edge. And if I wanted to get through that last little rust spot, then I think I would actually have to go to whetstones. or just spend like an hour polishing it, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but maybe is a bit silly. So while I do this, another note, I pointed out the scales earlier having that sort of skeletal finger pattern. And one of the things that I wondered when this was given to me is what are the scales made out of? Because it looks like they're intended to mimic ivory, but it's definitely not ivory. It feels plasticky, but based on the info I had, I was thinking, okay, if this is a like early 1900s, yes, there was some polymer manufacturing happening at that time, but um, there weren't really that many options compared to today, and I wasn't sure what it could have been. So I did actually look this up, and it turns out that celluloid was a popular option for razor scales and other sort of decorative plastic pieces in the early 1900s, which I did not know before. So I'm pretty sure this is a celluloid handle that is functioning as replacement ivory, synthetic ivory, if you will. So that's neat. And I think this is probably just about sharp, especially because it looks like I nicked the strop while I was flipping it over. So I dare say we are good to go. How's it looking? Not too shabby. Really nice mirror finish there. Very reflective. You can see it catching the light even though focus won't cooperate. Yeah, this is looking pretty good. There we go. Well, now we just have to get back into the question of who's this Reppenhagen fellow? To the internet. Let's do a little bit of research. Here we go. Freshly showered. Time to try this guy out. So I was doing some research, learning about M.E. Reppenhagen. Or at least I was trying to do some research. And the internet, in all its infinite wisdom, just wanted to sell me stuff. So, I'm searching for Reppenhagen Diamondine number 7 razor, and all I get is shopping results. So I dug into the primary sources, like what else could I do? I was able to find a record from 1895. Is this thing on? Hey, how you doing? Record from 1895, I believe it was the Orange County Record of New York, referring to a Max Reppenhagen from Germany, who came to the US and apparently started a business selling razor strops. Aha, there's a connection. So there's something. It was kind of an interesting story. It had like a little one-page summary of his life. But apparently he moved to the US, worked for a while, decided that he didn't like it here, moved back to Germany, decided he liked it in Germany less, moved back to the US, and got married and started a family and started a business and was a very respected member of the community. So that's pretty cool. I did look into the Diamondine model a little bit more as well, and it was made in Germany, imported to the US, so that is our Germany stamp here, and it was imported through a couple of businesses in New York, so that seems to hang together. So Reppenhagen, New York, late 1800s, early 1900s. which might leave you wondering what's the Army connection. This was maybe something that came from World War II? Maybe not. Let's see how it does. It's a little dull. Needs a little more TLC on the sharpening. Perfectly functional though. Not bad for living in a bathroom wall for decades and then coming out and spending 15 whole minutes getting polished a little bit. I'd say it works pretty darn well for what it's been through. One of the things that is frustrating about history is that it can be very hard to find good primary sources, and they usually raise as many questions as they answer. I certainly haven't gotten the whole story yet. But I've got enough to start piecing together a story anyway, which is quite interesting. But the other thing that's cool about history is here I am shaving with a 100, maybe 100+ year old razor, still as good as new, essentially. And so it makes you wonder about who else has, owned this artifact, used it. I can tell that I sharpened some parts of the blade better than others. We're going to spend a little more time on this guy. What was I saying? I don't know, something. But yeah, history, good stuff. The reason that I think the Army thing might be just a red herring, that it's just coincidence that this came from a military man who served in Germany, is, as I mentioned earlier, safety razors really started becoming a thing in the early 1900s, and the US Army started making safety razors available to its troops in World War I. So that they could be clean shaven and get better seals with their gas masks to protect from gas attacks in the trenches. But the safety razor, the Gillette safety razor with disposable blades, and with a lot less trouble cutting yourself and then patching yourself back together, was a huge improvement for the troops who didn't have to shave with a straight razor all the time and could stay clean. And the popularity of safety razors for military personnel really only increased over time. So by the time of World War II, I think it would have been very unusual to see a service member shaving with a straight razor. Now, could this thing have been acquired in Germany? Sure. Like, anything's possible, I have no idea. But the fact that this was a razor model made in Germany but imported to the US makes me wonder if, and imported to the US in the earlier part of the 1900s, much more World War I era than World War II era, makes me wonder if this was a family piece that was passed down from his father, or if he just picked it up at a store one day, or if it was an antique or a secondhand purchase. I'm thinking Depression era, you certainly wouldn't want to be buying a new razor, but if you really needed one, if that's when you're starting to shave in the 30s, maybe you could get a secondhand razor. So there's lots of possible stories that explain me holding this thing now. I see this blade is rather thirsty. I've got a few little nicks and scratches here. And part of that is just, I think, me needing to get the edge a little bit more set. It is bumpy in places. Maybe I will take this thing to the stones after all. Really not bad though. Well, I guess that's all the story I really had to tell for today. I don't have a whole lot more to say because I don't have a whole lot more answers, because despite the popularity of these diamonding razors among vintage razor aficionados, I really have not found much at all in the way of primary sources about who this Reppenhagen fellow was, how his company did business. I've got a couple names of a couple import companies that did import these razors to the US, but um, it's been difficult to track down more details. So, how did my great uncle come into possession of this thing? Who knows? Maybe he got it in Europe, maybe he got it in the States, maybe he bought it, maybe it was given to him. Um, Mysteries for the ages. But regardless, I now have a pretty dope 100-year-old razor that I've got back into shaving shape. And I think I'm going to put in a little work, do some polishing on it, take off more of the rust, maybe buff out a few of the scratches that are on here, get the edge a little bit more straight so that I don't put as many holes in myself next time I use it. But I think it's also worth pointing out that this is something that was meant to be used. This thing, hey, this thing isn't a museum piece. Again, it's a tool. It's an everyday object that was intended to shave with. So I feel like an important part of the history there is using it as it was intended, and not just leaving it on a shelf forever. All right, well, I think I'm gonna go get my 100 years younger razor and do a little finishing up here, because there's a couple spots I can't quite get with this thing for some reason. I don't know, it's weird. But I don't know, hope that was interesting, hope that was fun. Hopefully I still have all my blood next time you see me. So thanks for coming along and seeing a little bit of history live in action. I'm going to hit the workshop and get this thing all prettied up and be able to show it off someday. All right, catch you in the next one.